Nicholas Britell is fresh off an Emmy win just a few weeks ago for Succession, one of the theme songs I have heard the most about probably in the last year and a half since it first premiered. So well done and well deserved.
Thank you.
Nicholas has been a two-time Oscar nominee for If Beale Street Could Talk last February, and Moonlight 2 years before that. Both with Barry Jenkins, of course. And you've also heard his music in The Big Short and Vice and several other projects. So good to have you back with us. You joined us last year at this time.
Yeah, happy to be back here and very honored to be here with these amazing composers.
Well, tell us about The King. That's why you're here tonight. When did you first get involved?
I've had a very really amazing collaboration with Jeremy Kleiner and Dee Dee Gardner at Plan B Entertainment. We worked on many of the films that you mentioned there: Moonlight, Beale Street, Vice, Big Short, and in January, Dee Dee told me about this film, The King, and I was able actually to watch the movie in almost its final form, sort of a very, very, thorough, rough cut. And I watched it with nothing there, no music at all, no ideas, and just watching it kind of blank like that, it felt like this amazing canvas for music. And one of the things that I also took away from it was, this is a film and a story set in around the year 1413, so it's early 15th century, and yet the themes of the movie are questions and issues that every generation has to ask itself, things like intellectual fraud, what is true, what is false, questions of to whom do we entrust power, to whom do we entrust the power of the state, families in power. And these are things that obviously are relevant today. And I remember one of the first things I said to David was, I was like, and I'm always sort of mystified of like where these early instincts come from or why you think certain things when you first see a cut of a film. But I said to him, what if we imagined that the movie was set in the 25th century and not the 15th century? I'm not sure exactly why I thought that, but that was my first instinct, was just, this idea of looking at the 1400s like it was a foreign planet. And, 1400s are so far in the past. I think, and David and I talked about this, that no one has any comprehension of what that might have really been like. And because of the timelessness of these issues, it felt like something that we could explore with the sound of different time periods, just to make you look at the early 1400s in a way that it felt like you hadn't seen it before.
Well, I was going to ask, because of that reason, you and I have both seen lots of movies set in that time frame.
Exactly, yeah.
How do you avoid the cliches of the type of music somebody might expect?
Well, it's a very conscious conversation about this. I think there are certain things, and actually there are many movies that really lean into that in some of the ways that I love. But I think that the way David made the film, you always have to let the movie kind of tell you what it's looking for, and I think it's a combination of your responses in that way and being sort of honest with yourself about what you feel when you first see a film, and also the conversation with the director. What do they want? And David really did not want it to feel period. I actually, at one point in our process, I did this deep dive on late medieval music research and early Renaissance music. It's just like, what is the set? What was the music in England in the early 1400s? Sort of John Dunstable and the like. And I experimented with some of those things, and David definitely pulled me away from it. He was like, I'm not feeling this at all. So I think that it's always a question of, I think, coming up with a sound that feels like it's part of the film, but also something that is, hopefully a bit unexpected.
Well, as you would expect in this type of movie, there's a couple of big battle scenes, especially toward the end. There's a massive one. And in this case, it's us. When we talked about us, I knew most everybody had seen it. I don't think everybody's seen The King yet. Without giving any spoilers away, how did you prepare? What was going through your mind to get ready for the biggest battle scene?
In a similar way, I think, to what you were saying about the ideas of conventions, I think approaching this battle, and this isn't giving anything away, it's just the fact that one of the things that David really focused on, I think, throughout the film is this idea of the sort of human frailty and the idea that war isn't something glorious at all. It's actually something really sad. And, when you see these, what are basically very, young men, brutally killing each other, and he talks about how actually in Agincourt, most of the most of the deaths were actually from people being trampled on and drowning in mud. So it wasn't this sort of swashbuckling sword fights. It was actually something really sort of sad and emphasizing the human weakness of that. So I think we wanted to approach the battle in a way where there is a moment. I won't give anything away, but there are moments where we lean into the idea a bit of glorification of something, or seeming glorification of an idea, but the battle itself is at most places, I think, an exercise in counterpoint where you're feeling the dirt of it and the mud of it, and then there are moments also where the battle goes into sort of slow motion, and I'm always drawn to those moments in films where it feels like you're kind of zooming out from your experience, and you're getting a different feeling. I think that's something that film does so well, is provide a sense at times of contemplation of action and an idea, and without actually just directly dealing with something. So we looked at the battle that way, where there's certainly times you want to enhance things, and I think it's kind of the question with film music in general, which is this question of like, are you there to enhance what you're seeing and sort of like further it, or are you trying to go in counterpoint and say, oh, actually I see this, but I want to say this, and I think it's always a balancing act. You never really know, and I think we're always just talking about, are we approaching this the right way? Like, is that really the right answer? So,
when we talked to Michael, we talked about some of the quiet moments in the movie, still underscored, but quiet. You have several, very dialogue-oriented moments,
Yeah.
decision moments, a crowning of a king moments. Can you talk a little bit about the non-battle type scenes?
Absolutely. There are many different types of sequences, and there are about 4 key kind of musical motifs in the film. There is a kind of a strange motif that we were calling kind of like our war and fate motif, which is I think part of the film does deal with this idea of like, what are the forces in our lives? What actually does direct the path of our lives? And clearly for Hal, played by Timothée Chalamet, he was a kid who never expected to be king, and then his father dies and his brother is killed, and he essentially is going to take the throne. And I think that question of fate and what that is, I approached that theme leaning into that idea of the kind of the futuristic sound, like what is that 25th century sound? And it wasn't something, initially I did these sort of like synth experiments, and I don't think David was really feeling that very much. But what I did was I started by taking these bass clarinets and playing them out of their range, like high out of their range, and then running them through these sort of wavy tape filters, and it created this sound that felt very human, actually, but very odd. It's sort of unidentifiably odd, but organic. And that became this instrument that actually has this voice-like kind of quality to it, but isn't a voice, and has this, basically it's this descending tetrachord kind of motif. And then we did a lot of experimenting with metal and taking metal sounds and bending them and trying to see how they could feel musical. And then beyond that, there are 3 key thematic ideas. There's a thematic idea around the coronation, which is actually the music that sort of focuses around Hal as potentially following the wrong path. That's kind of the music of Hal as maybe going down a road of darkness a little bit. There's also a musical theme of Hal trying to be a good king and trying to understand, maybe is Hal understanding, is he making the right moves? And that's a theme of him and the sort of relationships around him understanding the role of the king. And then there is a Falstaff theme. Falstaff is his dear friend, his comrade.
That's a fun character to write for, isn't it?
Falstaff is, Falstaff's really, the relationship between Hal and Falstaff is the central element.
But he also brings this is Joel Edgerton's character. He brings a little humor to the movie, too.
Absolutely, and he's jovial. He represents kind of the Hal before he becomes king, which is the sort of like fun-loving lifestyle, and then also he's the person to whom Hal entrusts the knowledge of battle and is basically his comrade in arms. And the theme for Falstaff, the sort of crux around which it revolves, is this idea of it had to be a theme that would work both when you first meet them, but then also that would work at, and this isn't really spoiled, but the death of Falstaff. They would have to match those two moments well.
And where will we hear you next?
I just started working with Barry Jenkins on his Underground Railroad series that we're doing with Amazon, and I am also beginning. We're going to start shooting a film called Carmen. It's a complete reimagining of the Carmen story that Benjamin Millepied is directing. So it's a film musical that we'll be shooting next year.
Well, great. Nobody is having a hotter career right now than you. So thanks for coming today, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes.
All right, thanks. Happy to be here.